Hi, everyone. We'll give it a minute. Shall we get started, Lauren?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, let's get started. All right, thank you everybody who is joining our session today. Haritha and myself are co-hosting this presentation on mastering the virtual technical interview. We wanted to do this together so that you could get a perspective both from a technical recruiter and a hiring manager who happen to work really closely together on recruiting at Workday. So I will start with some introductions. My name is Lauren Cooley, and I am a Principal Talent Acquisition Partner here at Workday. A little bit about my background. My career has been both focused on human resources and recruiting. And over the years, I was always really attracted to the recruiting process and the candidate experience and recruiting strategy. And so slowly over time, I have moved into primarily recruiting type roles. And most recently, I have been at Workday probably for the last 3.5 years, working on various technical recruiting within different product organizations here. And for the past few years, I've worked really closely with Workday Analytics and have had the great pleasure to partner really closely with Haritha on a number of recruiting initiatives on her team. And so I will pass it off to you, Haritha, for an introduction as well.
Hi, everyone. I'm Haritha. I'm a senior engineering manager here and at the analytics organization of Workday. A little bit about myself. I started as an intern way back in 2010, came back as a full-time engineer back to Workday in 2011. And around 5 years ago, I switched my career from being an engineer to engineering manager. And I work very closely with Lauren on recruiting candidates in all levels, all the way from college recruits who are looking for their first entry into technical roles in a technology company to individuals who have a lot of experience in this industry. We work very closely in trying to get top talent into Workday. So we're very excited to talk to you today and give you tips around virtual interviews, both from a hiring manager perspective and a recruiter perspective as well. I'll start off by just going over the agenda real quick for today. Lauren will cover giving you tips on how to leverage a recruiter a lot more in your candidate and hiring experience. She'll also go over some good virtual environment tips to keep in mind. I'll give you some tips that will help you as you prepare for your technical interviews. I'll go over some skills that sometimes we forget about that are important for technical interviews as well. And then we'll open the floor for any questions. Handing it back to Lauren now.
All right, thank you, Haritha. Okay, so I wanted to start off with this quote. At the beginning of the new year, I did a lot of research on what the hiring trends might look like coming out of a unique year like 2020. And there were several articles, and a lot of them had the same sentiment. This is from an article with LinkedIn. LinkedIn does a lot of surveys. This surveyed recruiting and talent acquisition professionals, and the sentiment is that virtual recruiting is really here to stay. So hopefully a number of us will be returning to the office, whether that is full-time or potentially in some hybrid model. However, it looks like if you may be interviewing this year and beyond, you could experience a virtual part of your interview, whether that's the complete interview or part of it. And so we're hoping that the tips that we have today will not only help you currently, but for the near future as well. So I'm going to start off with some tips on how to really lean on your recruiter throughout your recruiting process. Oftentimes, the first person you talk to at a company that you applied to is your recruiter, and they are that consistent person that you may stay in touch with throughout your process. And so I cannot stress enough, really lean on your recruiter, use them as a really strong resource throughout your process. My first tip is around gathering details. Oftentimes you start your interview process with some sort of recruiter screen or recruiter interview. And during that call, the recruiter is assessing you for your fit into the role and the company, but also it's a time for you to be able to gather really pertinent details. And a recruiter can really set the stage on what your process might look like. So they can give you details on what type of interview format is this? So some companies may have a specific role on a specific team working on specific projects, and that's what you'll be interviewing for, while other companies have more of a broader scope where you may be interviewed at a high level, and then they will figure out what team that you will be placed on throughout the process. So understand that for yourself and really make sure that that aligns with what you're looking for as well. Also understand the timeline. Right now, headcount budgets might be a little different. So just find out, if this is a budgeted rec that you're being recruited for. Also find out, if there are, sorry, what the timeline is. So some companies may take several months to get you from point A to point B, while others may have a really fast-tracked rec that they're trying to fill incredibly quickly. Understand what that timeline is, and again, make sure that it really aligns with what you're looking for. And then lastly, really understand the details. How many rounds of interviews will you be going through? Who might you be interviewing with? What are the technical components? What kind of assessments might you be going through? As well as what the non-technical components might be, which leads me to my next tip. So while you may be interviewing for a really super technical role, a lot of companies are not just assessing you on your technical abilities. A lot of teams are going to be looking for what Haritha mentioned, and she'll go into more detail, are the soft skills. So find out if there will be behavioral-based questions or competency-based questions, and understand what you might need to prepare for in advance of your interviews. Also, with the non-technical components, really make sure that you understand your why. Now, a lot of us may find ourselves on a job search because we want a shorter commute, or we heard that this company is one of the best places to work in X city. And that's okay if that is part of your motivation, but really make sure that you understand beyond that what might make you a unique candidate and why you may want to work for this company or this specific product. Really being able to articulate that in your interview process will really make you stand out and shine to the interview team. Next, really understand the culture and values of a company. And this is also research that you can do independent, but while you're having conversations with your recruiter, you are oftentimes working with a recruiter who works for that company, and you have insider information that you might be able to get from your recruiter on their perspective. What's that culture like? Oftentimes recruiters are really closely connected to the hiring teams that they are working with, and they may have a sense of what's the engineering culture like on this team. Oftentimes companies have values on their site, and the recruiter might be able to tell you which values are really most aligned to this team. So really utilize your recruiter and ask them questions about the culture. And again, really make sure that it aligns with your own values, that you could really see yourself working for that company. Next, make sure that you request interview prep time. So once you get beyond that first screen with the recruiter and you may be moving on to subsequent rounds, it is perfectly fine for you to ask for interview prep time. Now, that can be done through a phone call. That might be materials that your interviewer or your recruiter can email you in advance, but make sure that you are really asking for this and advocating for it. On the other end, recruiters oftentimes are working with several different teams on several different recs and have all the good intentions to make sure you're as prepared as possible, but make sure you are being that squeaky wheel and getting in front of your recruiter so that you can get all that valuable information well in advance of your interviews. Once your interviews are complete, at any round, I encourage you to ask for feedback. And again, be that squeaky wheel and advocate for yourself for this. Every company may have a different policy on what they can and cannot share, but my hope is that at a high level, you can get some good nuggets of information following your interviews. Now, if that feedback is positive and you have more interviews to come, it will hopefully give you a little bit of positive reinforcement that you are on the right path. And if for some reason you are not moving forward, still ask for that feedback and just take in whatever they have to say and to share, and really use that to fuel you forward if you're interviewing with another company or perhaps another role with that same company. And then that also leads me into my last point, which is stay in touch. When you do ask for that feedback, I really encourage you, again, to ask if you can be considered for other roles, maybe within that organization or other parts of the company. And I oftentimes hear from former candidates all of the time. This is really a way, especially still in this virtual environment, for you to flex your networking muscle. And it is great for you to check in, send your recruiter an email from time to time. You now have someone on the inside that can advocate for you. And so oftentimes I have heard back from candidates who are asking me about another position, and I am happy to pass along their resume. So utilize your recruiter in that way for future opportunities as well. Okay, my next slide is on virtual interview tips. And so I know that we have all been working and living in this work from home environment in some capacity. And some of this might be repetitive, but it is always worth repeating, especially if you're going into an interview experience. My first one is really basic, but also really important. Make sure you're optimizing your space. By this, I mean, make sure all of your notifications are turned off. Completely shut down Outlook, turn off your Slack notifications, make sure that your phone is silenced. Just making sure that all those little noises that could get in the way of your time with that interviewer is eliminated. And so that there's very limited distractions. Also, by optimize your space, what I mean is, many of us are working from home and may not have a formal office. Say your office space is in your bedroom. Make sure you turn on a professional background so that the interview team doesn't see your bed or anything else that you might not want them to see. And then always consider your lighting. Make sure that they can see your face really clearly and your expressions as you're going through your interview process. Next, be authentic. And by this, I mean a few different things. One, I think that we forget, as the person who might be interviewing, that it's also hard for the interviewer to be interviewing, especially with technical interviews where you don't have a whiteboard in a room. It's okay to acknowledge, if it comes up during the conversation, that this is difficult. This is not the most optimal setting to be having your interviews in. So it's okay to admit that if that comes up. Also, if there are any background noises, so say you have a child in the home or a dog that might bark if the doorbell rings, it's okay to give a heads up on that. Again, these are all little distractions that could just take away from your experience or the interviewer's experience. So go ahead and just mention those as you are starting off your interview. My next one is call a friend. And this kind of leans into being authentic, which is making sure that you are making eye contact. It's really hard to do it. It's, again, one of those really simple tips, but something that you really should be practicing. And so call a friend well in advance of your interviews being scheduled. It could be your friend, it could be an ex-colleague that you really trust, it could be a family member. Just make sure that you're setting up some sort of virtual environment where you can practice eye contact. If you know behavioral-based questions will be part of the interview process, have that person run through a few scenarios with you. Practice talking about your technical projects and achievements. Make sure that the first time that you are talking about this is not on the day of your interview with your first interview. Make sure that you're doing this well in advance and practicing as much as possible. Next, do your research. Make sure, again, going back to my previous slide about relying on your recruiter and really using them as a resource, ask those questions and then go out and do your research. Find out what platforms might be used in as an alternate to whiteboarding. And then once you have that information, go out to that platform, and Haritha will talk about this during her slides, is test them out. Make sure you're comfortable with what is being used. Make sure you're asking how you will be interviewed. Is it Zoom? Is it WebEx? Is it a Google Hangout? Don't make assumptions on what might be used during that process. And again, make sure you're testing that out. Additionally, what I mean by doing your research is understand the product that you might be working on. Go out and read some articles, go to the company website, really make sure that you know as much as possible about the team, the product, the company, so that again, if you're asked that question about why X company, you have a really well thought out answer that you can articulate that will make you stand out as a candidate. And then lastly, send a thank you note. Again, we are still in a virtual environment, and you do not have the luxury of looking in someone's eyes, shaking their hand and saying, thank you so much for this interview. And so I cannot stress this enough. Please send a thank you note, whether that's an email that will go to your recruiter and then they can send that on, or if you have contact info, please make sure that you are expressing your gratitude. Sometimes I feel like sending a thank you note is a lost art, and I can tell you that it absolutely goes a long way and may have impact on your candidacy as the team is thinking through the feedback on your candidacy. All right, with that said, I'm going to pass this off to Haritha.
All right. Thank you, Lauren. And I must say, it feels good to get a thank you note from a candidate. It really does. So on this slide, I'll focus on giving you some tips around technical interviews and how to better prepare for technical interviews. The first one I want to call out is make sure you talk to your recruiter and ask your recruiter about how many rounds of technical interview there will be and what the interviewer may focus on in each of the rounds. Ask about, will there be a coding exercise? Will they ask design principle questions? Will it be algorithm focused? Make sure you get as much information as you can from the recruiter on what to expect in these technical rounds. If the recruiter doesn't know the information and answers to your question, they'll always go back to the team and go back to the hiring manager and ask us, what can I share with the candidate? What's okay to share with the candidate? And so you can always lean on your recruiter to get more information for you about the technical rounds. When you ask a recruiter about the technical rounds and what tools will be used in the technical rounds, focus on what the interview tools are. In a non-virtual environment, you would have been in the same room as the interviewer and you would have access to a whiteboard and markers and all that stuff. But in a virtual environment, we do not have that luxury. So we'll have to use certain tools that are available to interview candidates. So ask the recruiter what tools will be used during the interview. And one example I want to share with you is at Workday, we use HackerRank for some of our technical screens. And so you can actually sign up for HackerRank, get an account and play with the configurations and the layout of that tool. And you can get very familiar with where the buttons and everything are for the IDE so that you're better prepared for the technical interview. And it would be one less thing to think about during the interview a day. So I do recommend that you focus on using the interview tool and getting an account with the interview tool as well. The third thing I want to mention is practice. Make sure you practice a lot. If the coding exercises is on a language that maybe you're not familiar with, or maybe you used it in the past and it's not as fresh in your mind right now, practice, go learn, prepare for all the rounds of the technical interview that the recruiter had shared information with you about. And make sure you also practice talking about your projects. If you're an engineer that has a lot of work experience and you're trying to land a job in another company, practice talking about your projects. Practice abstracting it and giving a high level overview, as well as practice talking about the technical details of the project. And as Lauren mentioned, if you can find an engineering friend or a friend that you can talk to, then you can practice with them abstracting the project details and talk with them about the technical details as well. And also focus on what are the components that you worked on for that project specifically. So practice doing that, both the brushing up your technical skills as well as brushing up talking about the projects that you worked on, since the interviewers will be very interested in understanding what your contributions to the project specifically were. And also give yourself some time to do that. You should be in very close contact with your recruiter and make sure you have enough time to practice. Don't rush yourself into an interview. The next thing I want to mention is stay calm. This is a very tough thing to do on the day of the interview, because you may be tense about the interview and you're very much worried about the outcome, but stay calm throughout the interview process. And in one particular scenario that I want to talk about specifically is if you're a senior engineer, if you're an engineer with a lot of experience, and you are coming into the interview presenting a solution and answering the questions about the technical question, answering the technical question, make sure that you stay calm as you present your solution. And also, if your interviewer is poking holes into your solution and also is talking about an alternate solution, listen to them patiently, and then speak about why you think their solution or what they're proposing is okay or not okay. But do stay calm through that process. And what an interviewer is doing in that process, trying to test you, is they're trying to figure out how well are you reacting in a situation where your solution is not selected as the implementation for a project. You'll notice that in a real world scenario, there'll be a lot of solutions for the same problem statement. And so how do you react to changes in solution or different solutions being selected? And so this is a small segment that helps us assess that part about yourself. The next thing is I want to mention that it's okay to not know. If you go into the technical round and you don't know the answer to some question, don't make up an answer, but really be honest about not knowing the answer. And if you have a hunch of how to move forward, let the interviewer know at the beginning that you're going to attempt to solve the problem, but you may not know all the details. And so be honest about that. Talk about it through your interview process as well. The last thing I want to say here is to make sure you call out your technical accomplishments. You may have GitHub accounts where you've contributed to other projects on the side that's aside from your current work projects. You may have contributed to open source technologies. You may have academic papers. Make sure you add all of that to your resume and talk about that to the hiring manager as well as the interview panel as it comes up. Next, we're going to move on to a few skills that we think are very important for technical screens. And we crossed off the word soft here because Lauren and I stumbled upon an article that talked about these skills where it's really not soft skills, but these are very important skills that are good for you to have that may be hard to attain, but once you attain them, you can polish them going forward throughout your career. Let's start with them. The first one is communication. So make sure in your interview, in your technical rounds, your communication is crystal clear. Practice so that it does become crystal clear on the day of the interview. The next one is collaboration. If you have projects that you've worked on where you had to negotiate with cross-team members, if you've worked on cross-functional areas, make sure you call them out because many companies operate in a huge teamwork environment and there's a lot of teams that collaborate to make things happen. The third thing is coaching and mentoring. As companies grow big, as teams scale, we need to be able to coach and mentor new engineers that are coming into our team. So if you come in with the skill of I'm able to coach other people, once you've fully onboarded and you're not a new hire anymore, you get those opportunities to coach. So call that out in your technical interview as well. The next thing I want to mention is learning agility. So call out your accomplishments where you learned something new, either on the side along with the projects that you're contributing to at work, or during your project, you had to learn something new very quickly. In a world where technology moves very fast, you'll always be in an environment where you have to learn and adapt quickly. The last thing I want to mention is core values. Try to embed the core value into your technical screen. An example is that Workday customer service is one of our core values. And if you can talk about the projects where you worked on certain elements that helped the customer and helped through customer escalations, it's a good thing. So make sure you learn the core values of the company and try to embed it into your technical projects as well. I think I got to note that time's up. Let me just wrap up real quick and say we wouldn't be a good hiring manager and recruiter if we didn't call out that we are hiring. Please follow that link down below and see if you're interested in any of the open positions we have, and we'd love to have you in our Workday family. And we'll open it up for questions.
Actually, we don't have time for questions. I'm so sorry. But actually, I've been tracking your questions throughout, and you pretty much answered everyone's questions. So thank you both so much.
Fantastic.
They will be, you guys can reach out to them individually through the Hoova app. And please remember to rate this session. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
All right. We'll see you all at the next session.